Welcome to Life Stories. Today, we have a story that's filled with family drama, betrayal, and a journey of self-discovery. It's about a woman who was asked to fund her brother's wedding simply because she had a successful career, and how she found herself publicly humiliated by him in front of 100 wedding guests. But in the end, she turned the tables and revealed the truth, changing the course of her family forever. This is a tale of manipulation, truth, and the profound lesson of standing up for yourself. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to start the story today. I never thought I would be here, telling this story, but here we are. This is the story of my younger brother, James, his wedding, and the utter audacity he had to think that he could manipulate me into paying for it. I never imagined that I would be writing about the way he tried to humiliate me in front of 100 guests. How he thought he could use family ties to get what he wanted. And how, in the end, I made sure his bride knew exactly what kind of man she had married before the night was over. Let me start with a little background, so you can understand where I'm coming from. I'm 34, the eldest of 3 siblings. Growing up, I was always the responsible one, the one who took care of things, who didn't ask for much. James, on the other hand, was the golden child. He was born much later than me and our middle sibling, and for reasons I never understood. My parents absolutely spoiled him. They gave him everything, always treating him like the special one. I can't tell you how many times I had to watch as he was given the better room, the better gifts, while I had to make do with less. They'd tell me it was because I was the older sister. I should be understanding. But it didn't feel that way. I was the one who always had to be the mature one, who had to share my things and sacrifices without complaint. It started out small. As kids, I had to share my birthday presents with James because he was always feeling left out. He got the bigger bedroom, of course, because he needed space for all his toys. And when it came to things like sports gear, while I had to save every penny from my part-time jobs, James was given top-of-the-line gear by our parents. They had a way of justifying everything, always finding reasons why he deserved it more. Meanwhile, I learned to be self-sufficient, always working harder and giving up things so that I could have a fraction of what James was given. When it was time for college, it only got worse. My parents paid for James's tuition in full. They didn't even hesitate. I, on the other hand, had to take out loans and work part-time to get through school. I was always told, "You're a girl, you'll get married one day, and your husband will take care of you." I didn't mind working hard for my future, but it hurt to see how little faith my parents had in my abilities. Simply because I was a woman. And while I struggled to get by, James lived a carefree life. He partied, traveled, and lived like a king on our parents' dime. It didn't seem fair, but I never said anything. I just kept going, kept proving that I could make it on my own. Fast forward to the present day. I built a successful career in tech. I've worked hard, and now I make a 6-figure salary. I own my own home. I have everything I need. It wasn't easy, but I'm proud of what I've achieved. James, on the other hand, is a different story. He's job hopped for years, never managing to hold down a steady job, never saving any money. He still expects everyone to fund his lifestyle, including me, even though we're both adults now. That's where the wedding drama began. A few months ago, James and his fiancée, Emily, announced that they were getting married. I was genuinely happy for them and congratulated them, sending a nice gift as my way of showing my support. I thought that was the end of it. But little did I know, this would be far from over. One day, out of nowhere, James called me. I thought it was just to check in or maybe talk about the wedding plans. But instead, he casually dropped a bombshell. He told me that he and Emily were looking at wedding venues and, to his surprise, the prices were higher than they had expected. Weddings can be expensive, I said, thinking he was just venting. But then he surprised me. "Well," he said, his voice changing, "since you make so much more than I do, it would be fair if you helped out. You know, like covering the venue and catering." I thought he was joking. Surely, he was joking, but he wasn't. I laughed, trying to brush it off. "James, I'm not paying for your wedding," I said. His tone shifted immediately, and there was an edge to his voice. "Are you serious?" You make more than enough money. It's only fair. That was when I realized this was no joke. I tried to reason with him, explaining that it wasn't about the money. But he wasn't hearing it. He told me that our parents couldn't afford to help. And that Emily's parents weren't rich either. This is what family does, he said, guilt-tripping me into feeling responsible for their financial burden. I quickly shut that down. No, I said firmly. What family does is support each other equally. Mom and Dad paid for your college. But they didn't pay a dime for mine. You've gotten more financial help than I ever have. You're not entitled to my money. That's when he exploded. He called me selfish, greedy, and heartless. He ranted about how I had changed since making good money and how I had forgotten where I came from. I didn't respond to him. I just hung up. The next day, things got worse. James took to Facebook to air his grievances, posting something like, "It's sad when family values money over love. Some people in my life could help make our dream wedding happen. But they'd rather hoard their wealth instead of supporting family. Money changes people." It was obvious to everyone that he was talking about me. The comment section became a battlefield, with extended family members taking sides. Some even messaged me directly, saying that I should reconsider. Meanwhile, Emily said nothing, and I assumed she either didn't know about the drama or didn't care. But I was furious, and I was determined to make sure that everyone knew the truth. I had done nothing wrong. So when the wedding day arrived, I still attended, but I wasn't going to stay quiet for long. The wedding day arrived, and despite everything, I decided to attend. I wasn't about to let James think that I was avoiding the family event. Even though my anger towards him was still burning, I had already made up my mind that I wasn't going to stay silent. I'd already taken so much from him, but I wasn't about to allow him to get away with humiliating me in front of everyone at the wedding. The ceremony itself was beautiful. I'll admit that. Emily looked stunning in her white dress. And James, for all his flaws, did look happy standing at the altar. But as beautiful as it was, something gnawed at me the entire time. I was seething inside. The way James had manipulated the situation and tried to paint me as a villain, it wasn't just the money. It was the fact that he thought he could use our family bonds to get what he wanted. It wasn't just about paying for a wedding. It was about respect, about dignity, and about the audacity of taking advantage of someone just because they had the means. After the ceremony ended, the reception was in full swing. It was the typical wedding reception. Lots of food, drinks, and mingling. The guests were all smiling, having a good time. I tried my best to stay composed, not wanting to ruin the event. But in my mind, I was already planning my next move. I had every intention of confronting James and making sure the truth came out. The moment I dreaded arrived when James grabbed the microphone at the reception. He smiled at the guests and said, "Can we all take a moment to thank my sister for making this wedding possible?" I was stunned. I couldn't believe it. He stood there, smirking, as if he had pulled off the biggest con of his life. He told everyone that I had covered the cost of the wedding. The guests clapped, and I sat there in disbelief. How could he lie like that? So boldly and without shame? It felt like every pair of eyes in the room was suddenly on me. Some guests were smiling, nodding in approval, probably thinking I was this generous sister who had come to the rescue. Some of them looked confused, and I could sense that they were unsure if they should be applauding me or not. But there was one person who looked the most shocked of all, Emily. Her face went pale. I didn't know what James had told her, but I could see that she had no idea what was happening. I couldn't just sit there anymore. I couldn't let him get away with it. The silence in the room grew thicker, the air heavy with the tension I had been holding in. Slowly, I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. I took a deep breath, feeling the eyes of everyone on me. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, "here's the truth." The room went dead silent. I could feel James's face drop. He looked at me, shocked that I would call him out in front of everyone. I wasn't done, though. I didn't pay a single cent for this wedding. I continued. James asked me to pay for everything, the venue, the catering, everything, but I refused. And then he made a Facebook post trashing me for it. Gasps rippled through the room. I could hear whispers start. People trying to process what I was saying. I wasn't done. I couldn't stop now. James wanted me to pay for everything because he thought I was entitled to my money. When I said no, he called me greedy, he called me heartless, and he made sure everyone knew about it. Now, he's standing here, lying about it. Emily's face shifted from shock to something else. It was as if she had just realized the truth. Like the scales had fallen from her eyes. She turned to James, her expression shifting, and I could see that the realization was setting in. She turned to me. Is this true? She asked, her voice shaking. I looked her straight in the eye. Every word, I said firmly. James tried to grab the microphone back, but it was too late. Emily's parents, who had been sitting quietly nearby, were now standing up, their faces filled with disbelief. Emily's father, a quiet man who had said almost nothing all night, stood up and addressed James directly. You told us your sister insisted on paying for the wedding, he said, his voice low but filled with authority. The silence in the room was deafening. I glanced at James, and I could see the panic in his eyes. He had no excuses left. He couldn't lie his way out of this one. Emily's mother looked at James, her face contorted in disgust. Yes, actually, she said, her voice trembling with anger. You lied to us. You made us believe your sister backed out. James tried to speak, but the words failed him. Emily's mother turned to her daughter. We paid for half of this wedding under false pretenses. This isn't a wedding, it's a con. Emily's face had gone from shock to pure rage. She pulled off her engagement ring and set it down on the table in front of everyone. I'm done, she said, her voice cold and final. The room erupted in shock. James started begging, pleading with Emily to stay. Please, Emily, we can fix this. We love each other, he begged. But Emily wasn't having any of it. She shook her head and turned away from him. Love? You don't love me. You wanted my parents' money. And you wanted your sister's money. That's not love. With that, Emily's parents stood up, taking their daughter's side. We'll discuss the money you owe us later. Emily's father said, let's go. Half the wedding party walked out, leaving James standing there, utterly stunned. He had no idea how to handle this. The man who had once been the golden child, the one everyone adored, was now standing in front of a room full of people who had just witnessed his public disgrace. James stood frozen, utterly stunned by what had just happened. The wedding he had orchestrated with so much expectation had crumbled in front of him. And the most painful part was that he had no one to blame but himself. He turned to me, his eyes filled with a mix of fury and disbelief. You did this, he spat, his voice trembling with anger. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me react to his accusations. No, James had spent too much of his life trying to manipulate people, including me. Now, I had finally made sure that the truth was out. The lies, the guilt trips, the manipulation, none of it had worked. And now, he was reaping the consequences. Around me, the room was filled with whispers, gasps, and disbelieving stares. Some guests looked like they were frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Others exchanged wide-eyed glances, clearly trying to make sense of the family drama that had just unfolded in front of them. James's groomsmen, who had been standing by him, now looked embarrassed, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. But what really hit me the hardest was the look on Emily's face. She had gone from shock to rage to utter disbelief. She had clearly never suspected that James was capable of such manipulation, of lying so blatantly to both of their families. And I could tell, just by the way she looked at him, that she was starting to see him in a new light. Emily's parents were furious. I could see the tension in their faces, their anger directed squarely at James. Emily's father, who had been a quiet presence throughout the night, now stood with his arms crossed, glaring at James. His disappointment was evident, and I could almost hear the thoughts running through his head. He had trusted James, welcomed him into their family, and now he felt utterly betrayed. As for my parents, they were strangely quiet. My mother had her head down, as if she couldn't bear to watch this scene unfold. My father, on the other hand, rubbed his temples like he had a migraine brewing. I knew that he had always been a little more lenient with James. But even he couldn't ignore the magnitude of what was happening. For the first time, I saw him struggling to come to terms with the kind of person James had become. James tried to salvage the situation. But it was too late. Emily was done. She had heard enough. She turned to me one final time. Her voice low and measured. "How much did he ask you for?" she asked. A mixture of disbelief and anger in her tone. I didn't hesitate. "The full wedding," I said bluntly. "The venue, the catering, the dress, everything." A fresh wave of gasps spread through the room. The guests, still reeling from the earlier revelation, now had their jaws hanging open in shock. Someone in the back actually choked on their drink. The entire atmosphere had shifted. People had come to the wedding expecting to celebrate love. But now they were witnessing the destruction of it. It wasn't just a wedding anymore, it was a cautionary tale. Emily's mother, shaking her head, shot James a look so sharp it was almost as if she were trying to burn him with her gaze. "So, you wanted her to pay for everything?" she asked. Her voice barely above a whisper. But the question carried so much weight. James was trapped. There was no way to lie his way out of this. I could see the panic in his eyes. His usual bravado, his ability to manipulate, was nowhere to be found. For once, he was speechless. He didn't know how to fix this. "Well, yes, I asked her to pay," James finally admitted, though his voice trembled with guilt. "But she should have. She has the money. And we're family." That was it. Emily's father couldn't contain himself anymore. "So, you lied to us. You made us believe she backed out. And you let us think we were stranded. All while you tried to manipulate her into paying for your wedding?" His voice was filled with disbelief. And his anger was palpable. James tried to come up with an excuse. But there was no more room for his lies. Emily's mother, her voice shaking with emotion, turned to Emily. "We paid for half of this wedding under false pretenses," she said. "This isn't a wedding. It's a con." Emily stood still, her face now red with fury. The final straw had been pulled. And I could see that Emily had seen James for who he truly was. She wasn't going to forgive him. Not after this. Not after the way he had manipulated her, her family, and even me. The room was in chaos now. Emily turned to me, her voice quivering as she took off her engagement ring. "I'm done," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The finality in her voice was undeniable. The guests were in shock. And James had lost everything. He wasn't just losing Emily. He was losing the support of his friends, his family, and even the people who had once looked up to him. The truth had come out. And there was no going back. I watched as half the wedding party walked out. Emily's family, her parents included, were leading the charge. They had just found out the man they had welcomed into their lives wasn't the person they thought he was. The realization hit them hard. And they weren't going to stick around for this charade any longer. James was left standing there, exposed. The man who thought he could manipulate everyone had finally met his match. And I, for one, was glad to be the one who brought the truth to light. The days after the wedding were a blur. But one thing was certain. James's life had completely unraveled. His once carefully constructed facade of success and charm had crumbled in front of everyone. The lies, the manipulation, everything had been exposed. Emily's decision to leave him was the tipping point. And it wasn't long before the fallout spiraled out of control. James tried to reach out to me multiple times. Desperate for help, he sent me messages, emails, even called. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. He was toxic, manipulative, and now, completely alone. He tried to go back to our parents. But they had seen his true colors too. My mother cried, but she stayed out of it. My father, however, was resolute. He wasn't going to help James any longer. The consequences were his to bear. As for Emily, she moved on quickly. Within months, she was happily engaged to a man who truly respected her. I'm sure she was better off without James. And for me, things got easier. I'd never been more at peace with my decision to stand up for myself. I had learned the hard way that some people, no matter how much you love them, just don't deserve your help or your loyalty. James, meanwhile, was left struggling with debt, a ruined reputation, and no real friends to rely on. He became bitter, blaming everyone else for his failures. But as time passed, I realized that I wasn't responsible for his mistakes. If there's one lesson I took from all of this, it's that sometimes you have to let go. You have to stop carrying the weight of someone else's choices and start living for yourself. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more life stories.